You're looking at the USS Gerald R. Ford, the most advanced aircraft carrier ever built. In the Norwegian Sea, Russia's Navy tried to get a close-up look, sending 3 black hole submarines to stalk it. A NATO task force immediately activated a hammer and anvil hunt, relentlessly pounding the Russian subs with active sonar, forcing them to burn their batteries and blinding their sensors. But the most devastating part of the hunt was happening in total silence, from a U.S. predator the Russians never even knew was there. In mid-August of 2025, the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group was operating in the frigid waters of the Norwegian Sea, about 280 nautical miles northwest of Trondheim. They were wrapping up a high-level NATO anti-submarine warfare exercise. Suddenly, new contacts appeared. 3 Russian submarines dispatched from the Northern Fleet's 24th Submarine Division had managed to bypass the exercise's outer sensor layer. These weren't just any subs. They were identified as the Kazan, a terrifyingly quiet Yasen-M class nuclear-powered sub, the Severodvinsk, its predecessor from the original Project 885, and the Rostov-na-Don, an improved Kilo-class diesel-electric boat, nicknamed a black hole for its ability to disappear on battery power. Moscow's orders were clear. Get within 60 nautical miles of the Ford and record the strike group's complete electromagnetic and acoustic signature. This was not a random patrol. Western intelligence, later confirmed by satellite tracking, showed this was part of Russia's largest Northern Fleet sortie since 2019, involving 17 warships and 11 submarines. The Kremlin's goal was to map the Ford's unique signature before the arrival of NATO's massive Trident Juncture 2025 exercise. It was a critical miscalculation. The Russian command had fatally underestimated the speed and integration of the NATO network. Within 6 minutes of the first contact, the Russian submarine's presence was detected, identified, and fused. That data was instantly disseminated via Link 16 tactical data links to every NATO ship and aircraft in the area. The routine exercise immediately became a live-fire intelligence operation. The hunters had just become the hunted. The response was not a slow mobilization. It was an instant activation. A network of assets was immediately vectored toward the contact area. P-8A Poseidon aircraft, America's premier sub-hunters, took off from bases in Scotland, Norway, and Iceland. At the same time, 4 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, the USS Roosevelt, USS Ramage, USS Bulkley, and USS Nietzsche, broke from the strike group's main screen to form a primary interdiction barrier. This screen was not just a sensor platform. It was an active, lethal threat. Each destroyer is armed with RUM-139 VL-ASROC anti-submarine rockets. These are weapons fired from their vertical launch systems, capable of striking a submarine up to 15 nautical miles away. With a supersonic flight speed, they can deliver their torpedo payload in under 90 seconds. The Russian submarines weren't just detected. They were already being targeted. The assets in play represented the absolute apex of naval technology. The Russian contingent was formidable. The Kazan is a 130-meter nuclear-powered hunter-killer with a crew of 64 and a submerged speed of 31 knots, armed with 10 torpedo tubes and vertical launch systems for 1,000-mile range caliber cruise missiles. The Rostov-na-Don is a 74-meter diesel-electric sub, one of the quietest in the world on battery power and also caliber-capable. But they were facing an entire carrier strike group. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the centerpiece of CSG-12, was operating with its full air wing of over 70 aircraft. The Ticonderoga-class cruiser USS Normandy acting as the air defense commander, and its screen of advanced destroyers. The hunt was on. This wasn't a simple chase. It was a calculated, multi-layered prosecution, and the first 12 hours were a brutal game of acoustic cat and mouse. The Kazan, the most advanced of the Russian subs, immediately executed classic evasion doctrine. It dived deep, seeking a thermal layer in the water to mask its signature and escape the surface assets. It was a fatal error. The NATO command had anticipated this. They weren't just trying to find the subs, they were hurting them. The P-8s and MH-60R Seahawks helicopters initiated a shrinking box tactic. They didn't just drop sonobuoys randomly. They laid precise, active pinging lines that methodically forced the Russian subs into a pre-designated elimination zone. Simultaneously, the destroyers, led by the USS Roosevelt, engaged in a hammer and anvil maneuver. The destroyers pushed forward, activating their high-powered SQS-53C hull sonars, acting as the hammer to drive the submarines away from the carrier and directly into the anvil, the waiting sensor net of the P-8s, and the Royal Navy's towed arrays, which had been detached from a nearby patrol to join the hunt. The Alliance's primary target, however, was the Rostov-na-Donya. As a Kilo-class sub, it was an acoustic ghost on battery power, but those batteries were its anchor. The MH-60R Seahawks were tasked with a tactic known as sprinting the Kilo. They relentlessly dropped their AQS-22 dipping sonar, pinging active sonar directly on its predicted path. This forced the Russian commander into a high-speed evasive sprint and drift cycle, burning his limited battery reserves at an exponential rate. This acoustic barrage had a secondary devastating effect on the nuclear-powered Kazan and Severodvinsk. The constant high-decibel clanging from dozens of active sonars saturated their passive sensors. They were acoustically blind, unable to listen. They were forced to rely on their own active sonar to navigate, an act of desperation that instantly broadcasted their precise position to the entire NATO network. Trapped, deaf, and hounded, the Russian commanders were being systematically exhausted. For 48 straight hours, the Russian commanders were trapped in an acoustic hell. The ASW net was comprised of at least 8 P-8 Poseidons operating in rotation, supported by 5 MH-60R Seahawk helicopters cycling from the destroyers and the forward. They were joined by 2 Royal Navy Type 23 frigates, which brought their legendary Type 2087 towed array sonars. This 1-mile-long passive array can detect the faint, low-frequency sound of a propeller turning miles away. The tactic was acoustic saturation. The P-8s and Seahawks deployed over 420 sonobuoys, each costing thousands of dollars. They created a dense, inescapable sensor grid that emitted active sonar pings at 140 decibels, turning the entire ocean box into a 360-degree acoustic map. Every maneuver, every change in depth, every attempt by the Russian commanders to find a thermal layer to hide in was instantly detected, tracked, and logged. The result of this operation was not a sunken sub. It was something far more valuable, an intelligence jackpot. By the end of the second day, NATO ASW commands had logged more than 18 terabytes of acoustic data. This included a complete catalog of every frequency, every pump cycle, and every propeller harmonic unique to the Kazan, the Severodvinsk, and the Rostov-na-Donya. These are the acoustic fingerprints of the submarines, the very signatures they rely on for stealth. They had been captured. For Russia, the tactical failure was compounded by a massive financial loss. Leaked logistics data showed that a single Yasen-class submarine cost an estimated $1.6 million per day to operate at sea. Moscow had burned nearly $5 million on a 2-day mission that resulted in zero intelligence gained and the permanent loss of its most valuable asset, its secrecy. But here's the thing. The P-8s, the destroyers, and the helicopters were only the visible half of the operation. They were the loud, active hammer that was hurting the Russian subs. The real anvil, the unseen predator in the deep, was an American submarine. Shadowing the entire 48-hour event was a U.S. Virginia-class attack submarine, identified in debriefs as likely the USS North Dakota. The North Dakota was operating on its ultra-quiet electric drive mode, trailing less than 20 nautical miles behind the lead Russian sub, the Kazan. For 2 straight days, it maintained a perfect target solution, its advanced BQQ-10 bow and flank sonar arrays passively recording every desperate maneuver the Russian sub made. The Russian commanders had no idea they were being tailed by one of the most advanced hunter-killer submarines ever built. The North Dakota was transmitting this data in real time to the strike group via low probability of intercept buoy relays, feeding them a perfect picture from below the waves. At one point, the North Dakota's commander made a psychological move. The submarine briefly pinged its high-frequency active sonar. It was one single unmistakable pulse, sent directly at the Kazan. It was a signal that every submariner in the world understands. I see you. I've been here the whole time. You are already gone. The full picture of the Russian failure, a catastrophe of both doctrine and technology, was pieced together in the classified October 2025 debriefs at NATO's Maritime Command in Northwood, UK. As signals, intelligence, and acoustic data were overlaid with satellite imagery, the sheer scale of the operational collapse became undeniable. The initial reports from the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and the P-8 Poseidon patrol aircraft were already damning, but the most significant intelligence gain, the final total humiliation, was yet to come. The hunt was a masterpiece of coordinated anti-submarine warfare. Trapped by the relentless pursuit, the Russian commanders were systematically dismantled. Hounded by the destroyers from above, their active sonars pinging relentlessly, they were driven deep into a pre-planned kill box. But the true predator was unseen. The USS North Dakota, a Virginia-class attack submarine, was the invisible shepherd, passively tracking their every move from the cold, deep layers of the Norwegian Sea. Its advanced bowsphere sonar array and hull-mounted sensors logged every mechanical sound, every desperate maneuver. The Russian commanders were pushed beyond their limits, forced into high-speed evasive actions that bled their batteries and stressed their crews. The Kilo-class Rostov-na-Don failed first. A diesel-electric boat, its battery life was finite. Churning its propellers to evade detection, it couldn't surface to snorkel and recharge without being instantly detected. Its CO2 scrubbers became saturated. The air turned foul, then toxic. But the real shock was the Kazan. As a nuclear-powered Yasen-M-class submarine, one of Russia's most advanced and feared assets, it was designed to stay submerged for months. Its surfacing was, by all accounts, impossible. Yet its advanced air purification and oxygen generation systems had failed under the stress of the hunt. In a complete violation of their own stealth protocol, both the Rostov-na-Don and the nuclear-powered Kazan were forced to make an emergency ascent twice to ventilate their boats. They were forced to break the surface in broad daylight in the middle of a NATO carrier strike group, broadcasting their exact position to every satellite and radar in the hemisphere. It was the ultimate admission of defeat, a silent hunter forced to beg for air. The strategic takeaway was immediate and undeniable. The 18 terabytes of raw acoustic data collected by the North Dakota and the Sonar were a gold mine. This wasn't just a recording. It was a high-fidelity diagnostic of the entire Russian submarine fleet under maximum duress. NATO's Maritime Command immediately established Operation Cold Veil, a permanent acoustic ID program. That data was fed into a new acoustic analysis AI at Northwood Command. That database now holds the unique digital fingerprints for 19 active Russian submarines. It's not just the sound of their propellers. It's the specific frequencies of their coolant pumps, the signatures of their failing systems, and the acoustic profile of their hulls popping under depth pressure. Each boat is now identifiable within 5 seconds of sonar contact. The incident proved that NATO has achieved near real-time multi-domain sensor fusion. Air assets, surface assets, and subsurface assets were not just communicating. They were operating as a single integrated network. Russia's multi-billion-dollar investment in quiet stealth submarines, the very core of its naval denial strategy, was rendered obsolete in 48 hours. Their mission to gather intelligence ended with a complete intelligence collapse, an operational embarrassment and a tactical failure now permanently cataloged, indexed, and searchable in a NATO database.